I am Sloane, 33 years old, and I used to think family meant everything until they showed me I meant nothing. Just 2 days before Christmas, my father slammed a 5-page menu onto the kitchen counter, casually ordering me to serve 50 of my brother's high-profile friends. He smirked and told me it was a privilege for someone like me to cook for the elite. My brother nodded, expecting me to cook clean and bow. I just smiled. That night, I boarded a first-class flight to Hawaii. When they woke up to an empty kitchen and 50 hungry investors at their door, panic finally set in. But the real surprise was still to come. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace. It was the evening of December 23rd. The air in the sprawling kitchen of my parents' house in the wealthy suburbs of Chicago felt thick and suffocating. I had stopped by to drop off a holiday gift, entirely unaware that I was walking into a trap. My father, Howard, did not even offer a greeting when I stepped through the door. Instead, he tossed a thick, heavy stack of papers directly onto the marble counter right in front of me. The loud slap of the paper echoed in the quiet room. "Here is the finalized list," he said, his tone casual and demanding. I looked down at the 5 pages of complex high-end dishes. Wagyu beef Wellington truffle-infused risotto, seared scallops with a citrus glaze, and a half-dozen intricate vegan options. This was not a family dinner. This was a massive catering order. My brother Brandon leaned against the island, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He looked at me with that familiar, arrogant smirk he had perfected over the past 3 decades. He was the golden child, the self-proclaimed tech startup founder who had never actually launched a successful product in his life. "My investors are flying in tomorrow evening," Brandon announced, puffing out his chest. 50 of the top venture capitalists and angel investors in the state. I told them we would be hosting an exclusive 5-star networking dinner right here. "It is a huge opportunity, Sloane. You should be thanking me. I am giving you the chance to cook for the real elite. It will be great practice for your little cooking gig." I stared at him, my face completely blank. My little cooking gig. That was how my family referred to my career. What they did not know, what I had carefully hidden from them for years, was that I was the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar private catering and lifestyle brand. I regularly served celebrities, politicians, and billionaires. But in their eyes, I was just the family maid, the convenient scapegoat they could order around. My mother, Catherine, walked into the kitchen, adjusting her pearl necklace. She did not look at me. She simply pointed at the sink. "Make sure you polish the good silver tonight, Sloane. We cannot have Brandon looking bad in front of his guests. And please wear something presentable tomorrow. A clean apron, at least. We want to give off a professional impression." Then came the ultimate insult. My father reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills. He slid them across the counter toward me. "Here is $200 to cover the ingredients," he said with absolute seriousness. "Do not buy the cheap stuff either. These people know quality. Go to the premium butcher downtown and make sure the house is spotless before they arrive at 6. $200 for 50 people, eating Wagyu beef and truffles." The sheer delusion of their demands was almost comical. They expected me to fund their extravagant lie out of my own pocket, do all the backbreaking labor, and then fade into the background like a servant. At the breakfast nook, my African-American sister-in-law Jasmine was busy filing her long acrylic nails. Jasmine was a wannabe social media influencer who spent her days recording herself pretending to live a life of luxury she could not actually afford. She did not even bother to look up from her nails as she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Just make sure you do not burn the prime rib like you burned your college scholarship 10 years ago," Jasmine sneered, admiring her manicure. "Brandon needs this funding. Try not to ruin his life like you ruined your own." The room went completely silent, but nobody corrected her. Nobody defended me. Her cruel words hung in the air, a deliberate strike at my deepest scar. 10 years ago, I had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious culinary institute. I was packed and ready to go, but Brandon had gotten himself into massive debt with his first disastrous tech company. My parents, desperate to save their golden boy from ruin, forced me to decline the scholarship and empty my entire college savings account to bail him out. They told me family helps family and that Brandon would pay me back when he became a billionaire. He lost all my money in 6 months. I was left with nothing. I had to drop out, move into a cramped apartment, and work 80-hour weeks in hot, greasy commercial kitchens just to survive. I scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and fought tooth and nail for every single opportunity. I built an empire from the ashes they left me in. Yet, after everything they took from me, they still looked at me as the failure. They still believed I owed them my sweat, my time, and my money. A younger version of me would have cried. A younger version of me would have screamed, defended myself, and begged them to see my worth. But standing in that kitchen, looking at the arrogant faces of the people who were supposed to love me, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no tears, just a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at the $200 on the counter. Then I looked at my father, my mother, my brother, and his cruel wife. I reached out and calmly picked up the 5-page menu. I folded it neatly and placed it in my purse. Of course, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly even. I will make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve. They will have a Christmas dinner they will never forget. Brandon grinned, clapping his hands together. See, I told you she would do it. Now get moving, Sloan. You have a lot of prep work to do. I turned on my heel and walked out of the house. I did not go to the premium butcher. I did not go to the grocery store. I drove straight back to my luxury penthouse downtown. As soon as I walked through the door, I picked up my phone and called my private travel concierge. I need a first-class ticket to Maui, I said, staring out at the city skyline. Tonight. I packed a single designer suitcase with swimsuits, sunglasses, and linen dresses. I left my chef coats hanging in the closet. My family wanted to use me as a prop in their pathetic charade. They wanted to pretend they were wealthy hosts while treating me like dirt. I decided it was time to let them host all on their own. Let them face 50 hungry investors with nothing but $200 and their own massive egos. The trap was set, and I was about to watch it spring shut from a beach thousands of miles away. I zipped up my leather carry-on bag, the crisp sound echoing through my high-rise penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the freezing Chicago skyline, a glittering testament to the life I had built entirely on my own. My family thought I lived in a cramped studio apartment smelling of stale grease. They had no idea that Sloan Culinary was not just a side hustle. It was a nationwide empire of private dining services, high-end corporate catering, and a luxury lifestyle brand that had just secured a massive valuation. I did not need to yell at them in that kitchen. Screaming, crying, and begging for basic human respect are reactions reserved for people who lack power. I had absolute power, and I preferred to let my silence do the talking. My phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop. It was the family group chat, appropriately named by my mother as Family First. The notifications were rolling in like rapid-fire artillery. I picked up the device and watched the demands pile up. Jasmine was the first to start barking orders. She sent a list of ridiculous, highly specific grocery items she expected me to purchase with the $200 my father had so graciously provided. I need you to find organic hand-harvested matcha for my morning routine, she wrote. And make sure you get the artisanal vegan caviar for the appetizers. My followers will be expecting aesthetic plating, so do not just slop it on the dishes. Use the good tweezers. A minute later, my mother chimed in. Sloan, do not forget to scrub the baseboards in the guest bathroom. And use the expensive silver polish on the flatware. We cannot have Brandon looking like he comes from a family of peasants. Then came a voice note from Brandon. I tapped the play button, listening to his arrogant, nasally voice fill my luxurious kitchen. Listen to me very carefully, Sloan. The lead investor coming tomorrow is Mr. Harrington. He is a titan in the venture capital world. He eats at Michelin star restaurants every night. If you serve him something dry or tasteless, you will ruin my chance at a $5 million seed round. Stay out of sight when he arrives. Serve the food from the left, clear from the right, and do not try to make small talk. You are just the help tomorrow. A dark, genuine laugh escaped my chest. Mr. Harrington? William Harrington. The very same angel investor who had just poured $20 million into my company to help me expand to the West Coast. He was not just my biggest investor, he was a mentor and a close friend. Brandon was completely delusional, playing a dangerous game of pretend with a man who could spot a fraud from a mile away. The idea that Brandon was going to pitch his hollow debt-ridden tech startup to my business partner while treating me like a peasant was the most poetic justice I could have ever orchestrated. I slid my phone into my designer coat pocket and grabbed my bag. The private elevator took me directly down to the secure parking garage where a sleek black SUV was already waiting with the engine running. My private driver stepped out, opening the door for me with a respectful nod. "Good evening, Ms. Sloan." "The airport, I presume," he asked. "Yes," I replied, sinking into the heated leather seats. "The private terminal, please." As the SUV glided through the snowy streets of Chicago, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. For years, I had carried the heavy burden of daughterly guilt. I had let them gaslight me into believing that my worth was tied to my obedience. When they forced me to drain my college fund to save Brandon from his first miserable failure, they told me I was doing the noble thing. When I scrubbed dishes in sweaty kitchens until my hands bled just to pay my rent, they told me it built character. They took my future, handed it to Brandon on a silver platter, and then had the audacity to call me the family disappointment when he squandered it all. But I was not that scared, broke 23-year-old girl anymore. I had clawed my way out of the absolute bottom. I built my business late at night, pitching to clients while running on 2 hours of sleep. I earned every single dollar in my bank account through pure, relentless grit. I did not owe them a holiday meal. I did not owe them my servitude. I owed them absolutely nothing. We arrived at the VIP terminal, bypassing the chaotic holiday crowds completely. An attendant greeted me by name, taking my bag and escorting me to the first-class lounge. Soft jazz played in the background as a server handed me a flute of vintage champagne. I took a slow sip, letting the crisp bubbles wash away the last lingering traces of my family's toxic energy. My phone buzzed one final time. I pulled it out to see a text from Brandon. "Make sure breakfast is ready by 8 sharp tomorrow morning. Jasmine needs her matcha before she goes live on Instagram. Do not oversleep." I stared at the message. I pictured the chaotic scene that would unfold in just 9 hours. They would wake up in their sprawling suburban mansion. They would walk downstairs expecting the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. They would find a spotless, completely empty kitchen. They would open the refrigerator to find nothing but half-empty condiments and leftover takeout. They would realize that the 50 billionaires and venture capitalists they had invited were arriving that evening, and they had absolutely no food, no chef, and no way to fake their way out of it. I smiled, pressing my thumb against the screen. I swiped down and tapped the airplane mode icon. The phone disconnected from the cellular network, cutting off all calls, all texts, and all demands. Total beautiful silence. "Flight 482 to Maui is now ready for boarding," the lounge attendant announced softly. I stood up, leaving the empty champagne flute on the side table. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the boarding gate with my head held high. I was not just flying to Hawaii for a vacation. I was flying away to watch the fragile fake empire my family had built absolutely shatter into a million pieces. And the best part was, they had handed me the hammer. "Vincent, I need a flight out of the city immediately," I said, walking back to my suitcase to tuck my leather sandals inside. "I want to go to Maui, book the private luxury villa at the resort we discussed last month." "Consider it done," Vincent replied smoothly, the sound of keyboard clicking faintly in the background. "I have a first-class seat available on a red-eye departing at 2 in the morning. I will arrange for the VIP terminal transfer, so you can bypass the holiday security lines. Will you be needing the corporate jet for the return trip?" "Not this time," I said. "I will fly commercial first class for the departure. Just ensure the villa is fully stocked." "Absolutely," Vincent said. "And if you do not mind me saying, a vacation is well-deserved. The press release regarding your company's new $20 million valuation goes live on the 26th. Mr. Harrington's office called earlier to confirm the final details of the partnership expansion. They are thrilled to be backing your culinary brand on the West Coast. I smiled at the mention of my latest business triumph. Please let his team know the feeling is mutual, I replied. I will review the final press strategy from the beach. I ended the call and snapped my suitcase shut. The satisfying click echoed in the quiet penthouse. I had spent my early 20s scrubbing grease traps and crying in walk-in freezers to pay off the debt my family forced upon me. I had skipped meals, sacrificed sleep, and endured endless humiliation from my parents and brother. They looked at me and saw a college dropout. They saw someone who lacked the ambition to climb the corporate ladder. They never realized that while they were busy playing dress-up and begging for venture capital, I was quietly building a culinary empire. I did not need to climb their corporate ladder because I owned the entire building. My phone lit up again. Another text from Jasmine. Wake up early tomorrow. The brass fixtures in the guest bathroom look dull. Polish them before you start the meal prep. I picked up the phone, swiped down on the control center, and tapped the icon to activate airplane mode. The constant stream of toxic demands instantly vanished. The screen went dark, and the silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had heard all year. I grabbed the handle of my luggage and walked toward the front door of my penthouse. The security intercom buzzed gently. I pressed the speaker button. Ms. Sloan, the concierge desk announced. Your black luxury SUV has arrived. The driver is waiting for you at the private garage entrance. Thank you, I said. I stepped into the private elevator, the mirrored doors sliding shut, reflecting a woman who was finally entirely in control of her own destiny. The engine of the SUV purred softly in the underground garage, ready to whisk me away into the night. My family was about to wake up to the most important day of their lives, expecting a servant to cater to their every whim. Instead, they were going to find an empty kitchen, a ticking clock, and 50 hungry investors expecting a 5-star meal. The dominoes were lined up perfectly, and I had just pushed the first one over. I settled into the back seat of the vehicle, watching the snow-covered city streets roll by, heading straight for the airport. The nightmare was about to begin for them, but for me, the vacation was just starting. The black SUV glided to a smooth halt outside the VIP terminal at the airport. The bitter Chicago wind whipped flurries of snow across the pavement, but I barely felt the chill. A sharply dressed attendant immediately opened my door, shielding me with an umbrella, while another swiftly retrieved my designer luggage from the trunk. There was no waiting in endless security lines, no chaotic holiday crowds dragging oversized bags, and absolutely no stress. Within 10 minutes of stepping out of the vehicle, I was being escorted down a private jetway directly to my first-class suite on the commercial red-eye flight. Stepping onto the aircraft felt like crossing a threshold into a different universe. The flight attendant, a polished man with a warm smile, greeted me by name and guided me to my pod. It was a private sanctuary in the sky, complete with sliding doors, a lie-flat bed, and a tailored amenity kit filled with high-end skincare products. I sank into the plush leather seat, feeling the tension of the past 48 hours completely dissolve. "Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage, Ms. Sloan?" the flight attendant asked, holding a silver tray. "We have a lovely vintage champagne this evening." "That sounds absolutely perfect," I replied. As he poured the golden liquid into a crystal flute, I pulled my phone from my purse. I needed to temporarily disable airplane mode to send one final email to my corporate attorney. I wanted to ensure that a very specific legal document was finalized and ready for the week ahead. The network connected instantly, and as soon as the signal established itself, the device vibrated in my palm. It was a text from my brother Brandon. "Make sure breakfast is ready by 8 a.m. sharp. Jasmine needs her matcha before she does her morning social media routine. Do not burn the toast this time. We have a lot riding on today, so stay out of the way once the food is served." I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer audacity of his words was staggering. He was a 36-year-old man drowning in massive debt, living in our parents' house, pretending to be a tech visionary. His wife was a 34-year-old woman who spent her days staging fake luxury photos for the internet while relying on my unpaid labor to feed her. They actually believed they were royalty, and they firmly believed I was nothing more than the hired help they did not even have to pay. I picked up the crystal flute and took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne. The crisp, chilled liquid slid down my throat, a sharp contrast to the burning rage they had tried to instill in me for years. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt a profound, untouchable sense of victory. I tapped the settings icon on my screen and switched the phone back to airplane mode. The connection severed. The digital umbilical cord that tied me to their toxic demands was permanently cut. The trap was officially set. The plane engines roared to life, a deep, powerful vibration that signaled our departure. As we taxied down the runway and lifted off into the night sky, I looked out the window at the shrinking grid of city lights below. Somewhere down there, in a sprawling suburban mansion, my family was fast asleep. They were tucked into their warm beds, dreaming of venture capital funding angel investors and the lavish lifestyle they believed they were entitled to. They were entirely confident that when the sun rose on Christmas Eve, the smell of fresh coffee and expensive groceries would wake them up. They assumed their little catering problem was solved. They had no idea the kitchen was completely empty. They had no idea there was no Wagyu beef, no truffles, and no private chef waiting to serve them. They were hours away from hosting 50 billionaires and influential tech investors, and they had absolutely no plan B. As the aircraft climbed to 30,000 feet, leveling out above the storm clouds, the flight attendant returned to top off my glass. I reclined my seat, wrapping myself in the cashmere blanket provided in my suite. For the first time in a decade, I was not spending the holidays standing over a hot stove, frantically trying to please people who despised me. I was not chopping vegetables until my fingers blistered, and I was not biting my tongue while my sister-in-law insulted my career. Instead, I was soaring above the Pacific Ocean, heading toward a private tropical villa. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to visualize the exact moment they would walk into that kitchen. I pictured the confusion twisting my mother's face. I pictured the panic setting into my father's chest. I pictured Brandon realizing that his entire charade was about to collapse right in front of the very people he was trying to con. They had treated me like a pawn in their game of fake wealth, forgetting that I was the only one in the family who actually knew how to run a business. I had spent years dealing with demanding clients, managing complex logistics, and executing flawless, high-pressure events. I knew exactly what it took to pull off a dinner for 50 elite investors, and I knew exactly how fast a night could turn into a catastrophic disaster without the right preparation. The flight was smooth and entirely silent. I slept deeply undisturbed by the usual anxiety that plagued my holidays. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the aircraft windows, reflecting off the vast, sparkling expanse of the ocean below. The plane began its descent into Maui, and the cabin filled with the soft golden light of a tropical morning. We touched down gracefully. Stepping off the plane, the warm, fragrant Hawaiian breeze instantly replaced the memory of the freezing Chicago winter. A resort representative was already waiting for me at the gate with a fresh flower lei and a bright smile. As I was escorted to a waiting luxury transport, I did not reach for my phone. I knew the battery was fully charged, and I knew the family group chat was likely a war zone by now. It was currently mid-morning in Chicago. The panic had definitely set in. The screaming had surely started. Let them sweat, I thought to myself as I slid into the back of the open-air Jeep, heading toward my private oceanfront cabana. I had spent 33 years being their scapegoat. Today they would have to face their own incompetence. I leaned back, adjusted my designer sunglasses, and prepared to watch the absolute destruction of their fragile, arrogant world. I knew exactly how their morning unfolded because I watched it happen in real time. Sitting on the sun-drenched balcony of my private Maui cabana, I connected my tablet to the smart home security cameras installed throughout the Chicago mansion. My parents thought my father had paid for that state-of-the-art security system years ago. In reality, I had quietly paid for the installation myself when I purchased the property out of foreclosure to keep a roof over their heads, a secret I was saving for the perfect moment. For now, those cameras provided me with the ultimate front-row seat to their spectacular downfall. At 8 in the morning, the camera in the main hallway captured Jasmine emerging from the master suite. She was wearing a feathered silk robe, holding her phone high in the air as she recorded a video for her followers. I watched her perfectly made-up face contort into a fake, exhausted smile as she complained to her audience about the stress of hosting 50 powerful tech investors. She prattled on about how demanding her life as a founder's wife was completely oblivious to the impending disaster waiting for her downstairs. Catherine appeared a few moments later, wrapping a cashmere shawl tightly around her shoulders. She looked irritated, glaring at the empty hallway. Normally, I would have already delivered a tray with her specific herbal tea and warm lemon water directly to her door. Her mouth moved in sharp, angry shapes as she complained to Jasmine about my sheer laziness. Together, the two women marched down the grand staircase and pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. I switched the camera view to the kitchen feed, zooming in slightly to catch every detail of their reaction. They stopped dead in their tracks. The massive room was entirely silent. The heavy cast-iron stove was completely cold. The professional espresso machine remained switched off. There was no aroma of roasting garlic, no simmering pots of stock, no freshly baked pastries resting on cooling racks. The kitchen was absolutely spotless, gleaming under the recessed lighting, looking like a showroom that had never been touched by human hands. Jasmine immediately threw her hands in the air, her face twisting with genuine rage. She marched over to the massive double-door refrigerator and yanked it open. The camera perfectly captured the barren shelves inside. There was nothing but a half-empty bottle of ketchup, some expired mustard, and a single plastic container of leftover takeout from 2 nights ago. No wild-caught salmon, no Wagyu beef, no artisanal vegan caviar. Catherine rushed to the kitchen island, her eyes darting around wildly. Sitting right in the center of the pristine marble counter was the $200 my father had arrogantly thrown at me the night before. I had left the bills sitting perfectly straight, weighted down by the 5-page menu they had ordered me to execute. The security feed showed Catherine's hands physically shaking as she picked up the menu. I could almost hear the shrill tone of her voice as she began screaming for my brother. Brandon stormed into the kitchen less than a minute later, still wearing his expensive silk pajamas, a phone glued to his ear. He took one look at the empty counters, the cold stove, and his mother's terrified face, and he abruptly ended his call. He pointed at the $200, then pointed at the ceiling, gesturing violently toward my bedroom on the second floor. His face turned a deep mottled shade of crimson. He thought I was simply sleeping in. He thought I was staging a petty rebellion that he could crush with a few loud threats. I switched the camera feed to the second floor landing. Brandon took the stairs 2 at a time, his heavy footsteps visibly shaking the camera frame. He marched straight to my bedroom door and began pounding his fist against the wood. He beat on the door so hard I was surprised the wood did not crack. When he received no answer, his anger visibly boiled over. He grabbed the door handle, shoved it downward, and kicked the door wide open. He froze right on the threshold. My bedroom was completely stripped bare. The bed was perfectly made, not a single wrinkle in the duvet. The closet doors were wide open, revealing a row of completely empty wooden hangers, swaying slightly in the draft from the cracked window. My books were gone. My laptop was gone. My designer luggage was nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind was a cheap stained cooking apron I had tossed carelessly into the wastebasket near the door. I watched Brandon stumble backward into the hallway, running his hands through his hair in absolute disbelief. He pulled out his phone and started dialing frantically. On my end, in the beautiful warmth of Hawaii, my work phone remained blissfully silent in airplane mode. He ran back downstairs, nearly tripping over his own feet. When he burst back into the kitchen, the camera captured the raw, unfiltered terror radiating from all 3 of them. Catherine was clutching the kitchen counter as if her legs could no longer support her. Jasmine had dropped her phone, completely abandoning her social media persona, her hands covering her mouth in shock. The reality of their situation was finally crashing down on them like an avalanche. It was past 9 in the morning. In exactly 9 hours, 50 of the wealthiest and most influential angel investors in the country would be pulling their luxury cars into that driveway. Those investors were coming to experience a 5-star networking dinner. They were coming to be wined and dined by a man who claimed to be a sophisticated, successful technology founder. Brandon had absolutely no food. He had no staff. He had no plan. He had exactly $200 in cash sitting on a marble counter, which was not even enough to buy decent appetizers for a crowd that size, let alone a multi-course gourmet meal. And because it was the morning of Christmas Eve, every high-end catering company, every private chef, and every premium grocery store in the city was either completely booked, entirely sold out, or closed for the holiday. They were trapped in a cage of their own making. For years they had relied entirely on my unpaid labor to fund their illusions of grandeur. They had taken my expertise, my money, and my time, passing it off as their own success. They genuinely believed I was too broken, too compliant, and too desperate for their approval to ever fight back. They thought they could push me indefinitely without consequence. I took a sip of my freshly squeezed pineapple juice, listening to the gentle crash of the Hawaiian waves. The panic in that Chicago kitchen was palpable, even through a silent video feed. Brandon began pacing frantically, shouting at Jasmine, who immediately started screaming back at him. Catherine collapsed into a bar stool, burying her face in her hands. The golden child was facing his biggest audience yet, and his mask was about to be violently ripped off. The countdown had officially started, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop the impending disaster. I settled back against the plush cushions of my cabana, the warm Maui sun baking into my skin. The rhythmic crash of the waves was a soothing background track to the absolute carnage I was about to unleash. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the settings menu. It was time. I toggled off airplane mode and connected to the resort's high-speed Wi-Fi. The device immediately seized up. It began vibrating so violently against my palm that it almost slipped from my grasp. The notification sounds stacked on top of one another, a chaotic symphony of desperate pings and aggressive chimes. 100 messages, then 150. By the time the phone stopped seizing, the Family First group chat displayed a staggering 247 unread messages. I opened the chat, a smirk playing on my lips. It was like reading a psychological study in real-time panic. The messages started around 8:15 a.m. right after their horrifying discovery in the kitchen. Brandon, where the hell are you? The kitchen is completely empty. Stop playing games and get downstairs right now. 5 minutes later, the realization that I wasn't in the house had clearly set in. Brandon. This isn't funny, Sloan. You're ruining my morning. Get back here and start prepping. I have investors arriving at 6. Then the tone shifted from demanding to panicked, the timeline matching up perfectly with his discovery of my empty bedroom. Brandon, did you seriously leave? Where is all your stuff? You can't do this to me today. Mr. Harrington is coming. If he doesn't get a 5-star meal, he walks and I lose everything. Get back here now. At 9 a.m. Catherine joined the fray. Her messages were typed in furious all caps, lacking any semblance of her usual carefully constructed elegance. Catherine Sloan. Eloise. I demand you return this instant. How dare you abandon this family on Christmas Eve? You are a selfish, blood-sucking failure after everything we have done for you. This is how you repay us. I scrolled past her hysterics. Blood-sucking failure. The projection was almost impressive. I was the only person in that house who had ever actually earned $1, yet she was calling me a parasite. By 9:30, Howard had entered the chat. His messages were cold, authoritative, and laced with the ultimate threat he had held over my head my entire life. Howard Sloan, you have exactly 1 hour to walk through that front door. If you ruin your brother's investment dinner, you are dead to me. I will cut you off completely. I will disown you. You will never see another cent from this family. Consider your future carefully. Cut me off! I let out a genuine, uninhibited laugh. Cut me off from what exactly? The non-existent trust fund he had drained years ago, the inheritance that was currently tied up in Brandon's mountain of undisclosed debt. He was threatening to withhold resources that didn't even exist, wielding a weapon that was completely imaginary. Jasmine's messages were a frantic blur of self-pity and entitlement. Jasmine, you are literally a monster. My followers are expecting a holiday home tour tonight. What am I supposed to serve them? Takeout. You're trying to make me look like a joke. I knew you were jealous of my success. But this is pathological. Jealous of her success. A fake follower count and a mountain of credit card debt. Yes, I was practically green with envy. The barrage continued, a relentless cycle of threats, guilt trips, and outright begging. They demanded I come back. They threatened to call the police and report me missing. They accused me of trying to sabotage Brandon's brilliant career out of spite. Brandon, I will ruin your little catering business if you don't fix this. I will leave bad reviews everywhere. You think you can survive without Dad's money? You're nothing without us. I leaned back, resting the phone on my lap, and picked up the Mai Tai the cabana attendant had just delivered. I took a slow sip, the sweet tropical flavors contrasting perfectly with the bitter venom radiating from my screen. They were completely unhinged, spiraling out of control, because the foundation of their entire existence, my silent, unpaid compliance, had been yanked out from under them. They still didn't get it. They still thought I was the scared 23-year-old girl who needed their approval to survive. They still believed that Howard's empty threats held power. They had no idea that I didn't need their money because I was currently funding their entire lifestyle. I scrolled back to the top of the chat, reading through the messages one more time. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I didn't feel any obligation to step in and save them. They had dug this grave with their own arrogance, and now they were going to have to lie in it. The 50 VIP guests were still coming. The clock was still ticking, and they were still staring at an empty kitchen and a $200 bill. I set the phone down on the small table next to my lounge chair. I wasn't going to reply. Not yet. Letting them stew in their own manufactured crisis was far more entertaining. I wanted them to exhaust every option to realize the full extent of their helplessness before I delivered the final crushing blow. The digital meltdown was just the appetizer. The main course was going to be spectacular. I set my empty glass on the bamboo table next to my lounge chair. The digital meltdown in the family group chat was entertaining, but I knew my sister-in-law well enough to know she would not stop at private text messages. Jasmine thrived on public attention. She needed an audience to validate her existence. Right on cue, a notification popped up at the top of my tablet screen. Jasmine was going live on Instagram. I tapped the banner, expanding the video to full screen. Jasmine was standing in the corner of my parents' massive kitchen. She had clearly spent the last 20 minutes doing damage control on her makeup. She had applied just enough waterproof mascara to look put together, but left her under eyes slightly smudged to give the illusion that she had been weeping uncontrollably. A ring light reflected perfectly in her eyes. "Hey guys," Jasmine began, her voice quivering with practiced vulnerability. "I really did not want to come on here and be negative on Christmas Eve. I wanted to show you my holiday home tour and share the gorgeous tablescape I designed. But honestly, my heart is just completely broken right now." She paused, taking a shaky breath and pressing a manicured hand to her chest. I watched the viewer count tick upward. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. Mostly bored teenagers and bot accounts, but Jasmine treated them like a congregation. Family is supposed to be everything. She continued, looking directly into the lens. "My husband Brandon has been working around the clock. He is on the verge of closing a massive tech deal that will change our lives. We invited 50 prominent investors to our home tonight to celebrate and network. We asked his sister Sloane to help us out with the cooking, just a simple favor for family. A simple favor." I scoffed quietly, feeling the warm Hawaiian breeze rustle the palm leaves above my cabana. 50 elite investors, 5 courses of Wagyu beef and truffles, and a demand to scrub baseboards, all funded by a pathetic $200 bill. Yes, just a simple favor. "But guys," Jasmine said, letting a single perfectly timed tear escape and roll down her cheek. "Sloane has always harbored so much dark, toxic jealousy toward my husband. She dropped out of college years ago and never really did anything with her life. Seeing Brandon succeed must have just been too much for her to handle. We woke up this morning to find that she had packed her bags and fled the state. She abandoned us on Christmas Eve." The comment section on the live stream began moving at warp speed. Emojis of broken hearts and angry faces flooded the screen. Her followers were eating it up, validating her fabricated victimhood without a second thought. "But it is not even about the dinner," Jasmine sniffled, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. It is about my elderly in-laws. Howard and Catherine are so frail, so kind-hearted. They gave her everything and she left them crying in the empty kitchen. My poor mother-in-law is having palpitations. How can someone be so incredibly selfish, so devoid of human empathy? I had to admire the sheer audacity of the performance. Calling my domineering country club obsessed mother frail was a masterful stretch of the imagination. Catherine was probably off camera screaming at a customer service representative from a high-end catering company, trying to bribe them into an emergency delivery. Then Jasmine leaned closer to the camera, her tone shifting from sorrowful victim to righteous avenger. The cyberbullying campaign was about to be launched. I need a favor from all of you, Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Sloane runs this tiny, struggling catering side hustle in Chicago. She thinks she is some kind of chef. If you search her name, Sloane Catering Chicago, you might find her pages. I am not telling you to be mean. I am just saying that actions have consequences. People need to know that you cannot trust a business owner who abandons her own elderly parents on a major holiday just to ruin her brother's success. Leave a review. Warn people. Show her that the internet does not reward toxic behavior. The comments instantly turned vicious. Her followers promised to track down my business. They pledged to leave 1-star reviews on Yelp, Google, and Facebook. They vowed to destroy my livelihood. Jasmine smiled sadly at the screen, thanked her followers for their immense support, and promised to keep them updated on how they would survive the dinner crisis. Then she ended the live stream. I locked my tablet and set it down absolutely unfazed. Jasmine's threat was completely toothless, a digital temper tantrum thrown into the void. She had instructed her internet mob to search for a struggling side hustle under my first name. They would find absolutely nothing. My corporate entity operated under a holding company that shielded my personal identity from public searches. I did not rely on Yelp reviews or Facebook ratings to get clients. I did not cater to the general public. My clientele consisted exclusively of Fortune 500 corporations, private family offices, and ultra-high net worth individuals who booked my services through ironclad non-disclosure agreements and private referrals. A bunch of angry teenagers leaving fake reviews on random Chicago food blogs would not even make a dent in my search engine optimization, let alone impact my bottom line. The attempt to ruin me online was nothing more than a desperate distraction. Jasmine was trying to control a narrative on the internet because she had absolutely zero control over the reality in her own kitchen. She could garner all the sympathy she wanted from her screen, but her followers could not cook a 5-star meal for 50 billionaires by 6 o'clock tonight. I checked the time on my watch. It was approaching noon in the Midwest. The window for finding a last-minute replacement chef had officially closed. The high-end grocery stores were picked clean. The panic in that house was no longer just a morning shock. It was evolving into an inescapable, suffocating dread. They had wasted their morning screaming into their phones and performing for social media, completely failing to solve the actual logistical nightmare they were facing. They thought they were punishing me. They thought their digital threats and group chat ultimatums would break my resolve and send me crawling back to save them. It was time to shatter that illusion entirely. It was time to send the one and only response they would get from me today. I picked up my phone and turned off airplane mode, once more preparing to deliver the final nail in the coffin. The midday Hawaiian sun was a blanket of pure gold across my skin. I shifted on my padded teak lounger, letting the gentle trade winds wash over me. The air smelled of salt and blooming hibiscus a million miles away from the sterile, frigid tension that currently choked the air of my parents' Chicago mansion. I picked up my phone, the sleek device feeling unusually light in my hand. For 33 years, this piece of technology had been an electronic leash buzzing constantly with their demands, their criticisms, and their endless expectations. Today, it was just a screen. I unlocked it, bypassing the hundreds of missed calls and individual text messages from my frantic brother, my raging mother, my silent father, and my performative sister-in-law. I navigated directly to the Family First group chat. The feed was a graveyard of their mounting desperation. The initial anger from early morning had slowly transitioned into bargaining and finally into outright panic. Brandon was offering me a fabricated cut of his imaginary seed round if I just got on a plane immediately. Catherine was promising to finally acknowledge my catering business to her country club friends if I saved the dinner. They were offering me worthless currency to buy back my submission. I did not want their fake equity. I did not want their conditional praise. I wanted them to face the mirror. I opened the camera application on my phone. The composition of the photograph had to be absolutely flawless. I wanted a single image that communicated everything words could not. I extended my legs perfectly tanned and resting against the pristine white towel of the cabana chair. In my right hand, I lifted the vibrant Mai Tai the attendant had brought me earlier. Condensation beaded on the chilled glass, a slice of fresh pineapple, and a vibrant tropical flower resting on the rim. In the background, the frame was filled entirely by the breathtaking crystal-clear turquoise water of the Pacific Ocean and a single swaying palm tree. It was a postcard of absolute untouchable luxury. It was the visual definition of peace. I snapped the picture. It was perfect. I attached the image to the family group chat. I did not write a long emotional paragraph detailing my trauma. I did not list the years of financial abuse or the psychological manipulation. People like my parents and my brother thrive on long emotional explanations because it gives them material to argue with. It gives them something to gaslight. A short, undeniable statement leaves no room for debate. I tapped the text box and typed exactly 2 sentences. I am not your maid. Good luck feeding 50 VIP investors with Mom's frozen lasagna. I stared at the words for a fraction of a second. Mom's frozen lasagna was a deliberate surgical strike. Whenever my mother did not feel like cooking, which was always, she relied on a stockpile of cheap frozen store-bought lasagnas hidden in the basement chest freezer. It was the ultimate symbol of their domestic incompetence. Pointing it out was my way of reminding them that without me, they had absolutely zero capability to host anything more sophisticated than a microwave dinner. I pressed send. A small green checkmark appeared, delivered. Then almost instantly the word changed, read. I did not wait for the typing bubbles to appear. I tapped the information icon at the top of the chat. I scrolled down to the mute alerts option and selected it. A prompt asked how long I wanted to mute the conversation. I tapped the option that said indefinitely. The digital tether was officially severed. I tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me and immediately picked up my tablet, opening the smart home security application. I had to see the exact moment the reality of their impending doom finally hit them. The live feed of the Chicago kitchen loaded on my screen in high definition. The 4 of them were huddled around the massive marble island, looking like generals in a war room who had just realized they were out of ammunition. Brandon was pacing. Jasmine was biting her thumbnail, her perfectly manicured acrylics ruined. Catherine was holding a cordless landline phone to her ear, likely still trying to beg local restaurants for a massive catering miracle. Howard stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of silent rage. Then it happened. 4 cell phones pinged in unison. The sound must have been deafening in that tense, quiet room. On the screen, I watched 4 heads snap downward simultaneously. Brandon ripped his phone out of his silk pajama pocket. Jasmine lunged for hers on the counter. Howard slowly reached into his slacks. Catherine lowered the landline from her ear and picked up her device with trembling fingers. The synchronization of their physical reactions was a masterpiece. Brandon stopped pacing completely. His shoulders slumped forward, and all the arrogant, frantic energy visibly drained from his body. He stared at the screen, his mouth falling open, as his eyes took in the turquoise Hawaiian waters. The illusion that I was hiding somewhere in the city, the hope that I could be bullied into rushing over in a taxi, evaporated instantly. I was thousands of miles across an ocean. I was physically, geographically untouchable. Jasmine let out a visible shriek. Although the security feed was silent, her body language screamed absolute terror. She dropped her phone onto the marble counter as if it had burned her. She gripped the edges of the island, her knuckles turning white, her social media influencer facade shattering completely. She knew exactly what this meant. Her husband was going to be exposed as a fraud, and her lavish lifestyle was going to be publicly humiliated. Catherine slumped onto a bar stool. She brought a hand to her chest, her posture crumbling. The mention of the frozen lasagna had clearly hit its mark. She looked around her massive, spotless kitchen, finally grasping the horrifying truth. The grand stage was set. The audience of billionaires was on their way, and the actors had absolutely no script. Howard simply turned away from the group. He walked over to the large kitchen window and stared out at the freezing Chicago snow. His shoulders, usually so rigid with authority, looked heavy and defeated. They were completely out of options. The clock on the wall behind them showed it was past noon. The guests would arrive in less than 6 hours. There was no more screaming to be done. There were no more threats to hurl. The heavy, suffocating silence of total failure settled over the kitchen. I locked my tablet, leaned my head back against the cabana cushion, and closed my eyes, savoring the warm, tropical breeze. The first phase of my retaliation was complete, and the main event was just hours away. The Hawaiian sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning gold. I adjusted my tablet on the bamboo table, switching the camera feed from the empty kitchen to the exterior driveway of the Chicago mansion. It was exactly 5:55 in the evening. The snow was falling heavily now, blanketing the manicured lawns of the upscale neighborhood. Right on schedule, a parade of matte black vehicles began turning into the circular driveway. Maybach's top-tier Teslas and custom luxury SUVs lined up one after another. Valets that Brandon must have frantically hired at the last minute rushed out into the freezing cold to open doors. The 50 elite investors were here. The camera in the grand foyer showed Brandon standing by the massive mahogany double doors. He had changed out of his panicked morning attire and was now wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit that he had undoubtedly purchased using our parents' maxed-out credit cards. Beside him stood Jasmine, wearing a sequined evening gown, her hair perfectly smoothed back into a sleek bun. She was projecting the exact image of a flawless, supportive tech founder's wife. The sheer effort they were putting into this performance was Oscar-worthy. Brandon pulled the heavy doors open with a wide, magnetic smile. "Welcome, everyone." He projected his voice booming with a fake, unearned authority. "Come in out of the cold. Welcome to our home." I watched him shake hands with prominent venture capitalists, acting as though he effortlessly belonged in their orbit. He spoke with a practiced cadence, dropping buzzwords like synergy, disruptive innovation, and market scaling with nauseating ease. Jasmine took their coats, offering polite, rehearsed laughs at their corporate jokes. A group of older investors stepped into the grand living room, admiring the 20-foot vaulted ceilings and the custom marble fireplace. "It is a stunning property, Brandon," one of the men remarked, gesturing to the sweeping staircase. "You have excellent taste." Brandon let out a humble, self-deprecating chuckle. "Thank you, Richard," he replied smoothly. "I bought the estate a few years ago as a little reward to myself after my last successful exit. It is a great place to entertain and brainstorm the next big thing." Sitting thousands of miles away, I actually had to applaud his sheer audacity. He was standing in my house. The property my limited liability company had legally purchased out of foreclosure to save him and my parents from living on the streets, and he was bragging about it to billionaires as if he held the deed. He was wearing the skin of a highly successful man, entirely unaware that the actual owner was watching him dig his own grave on a high-definition live stream. Howard and Catherine were mingling near the bar area, forcing tight, nervous smiles as they handed out glasses of wine. They were trying desperately to look like relaxed, wealthy parents of a tech prodigy, but their stiff posture betrayed their absolute terror. Another investor, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored pantsuit, approached Brandon. "It smells rather quiet in here for a dinner party of this magnitude," she noted, playfully glancing toward the closed kitchen doors. "When can we expect the main event? We have heard incredible things about the menu." Brandon did not miss a single beat. He placed a hand over his heart in a gesture of grand hospitality. "My private five-star chef is just putting the finishing touches on the menu as we speak." He lied without a single flinch. "She is an absolute master of culinary arts. I gave her strict instructions to prepare a feast that reflects the caliber of the minds in this room tonight. We are keeping the kitchen doors closed to maintain the element of surprise, but I promise you it will be a culinary experience you will talk about for years. A culinary experience they would talk about for years. That was the only truthful statement my brother had made all evening. The female investor smiled, clearly impressed. "And William Harrington?" she asked, looking around the room. "I was told he would be attending tonight. We are all quite eager to hear his thoughts on your seed round." Brandon adjusted his cuffs, his smile tightening just a fraction of an inch. "Mr. Harrington texted me earlier to say he is running a bit behind schedule." Brandon lied effortlessly. "You know how these industry titans are." But he assured me he would not miss this dinner for the world. "He will be joining us shortly." I took a slow sip of my fresh cocktail, savoring the cool, fruity taste against the warm ocean breeze. Brandon was spinning a web of million-dollar delusions, promising the arrival of an angel investor he had never actually met. While Brandon held court in the living room, the camera feed in the kitchen told a completely different story. I split the screen on my tablet to watch both rooms simultaneously. Behind those heavy wooden swinging doors, the reality of their situation was a stark, chaotic nightmare. The illusion of the Silicon Valley genius stopped exactly where the hallway ended. In the living room, 50 powerful people expected Wagyu beef, rare truffles, and elite networking. They expected the seamless, flawless execution of a man who managed millions of dollars. They stood sipping their wine, entirely captivated by the confident persona my brother was projecting. He was selling them a dream built on stolen real estate and imaginary wealth. The tension was stretching to its absolute breaking point. Brandon was playing his role perfectly, but a performance can only last for so long before the audience demands the main act. The guests were getting comfortable, their expectations climbing higher with every lie that left my brother's mouth. I leaned forward, my eyes glued to the dual screens. The overture was finished. The guests were seated in the theater of his deception, and the curtain was finally rising on the absolute disaster he had created for himself. I shifted my attention to the left side of my tablet screen. The live feed from the kitchen was a masterpiece of absolute desperation. If the living room was a carefully rehearsed stage play, the kitchen was the chaotic backstage where everything was catching fire. The pristine marble island, which just yesterday my mother demanded I scrub until it shined, was now completely covered in a mountain of greasy brown paper bags and cheap cardboard delivery boxes. Catherine and Jasmine were operating in a state of blind, frantic panic. Jasmine had completely abandoned her poised influencer persona. Her sequined evening gown was already stained with drops of dark soy sauce. She was frantically ripping open white cardboard containers with the wire handles, grabbing metal serving spoons, and dumping giant mounds of sticky sweet and sour chicken onto my expensive gold-rimmed porcelain plates. Catherine was standing next to her, breathing heavily, trying to arrange greasy lo mein noodles into elegant nests using a pair of plastic tongs. She looked like a woman on the verge of a total nervous breakdown. Every time a drop of neon orange sauce splattered onto the pristine white china, Catherine aggressively scrubbed at it with a crumpled paper towel, her hands shaking violently. They had completely panicked when they realized cooking was impossible. Instead of admitting defeat, they had clearly emptied their bank accounts to order mass quantities of the cheapest, fastest food they could get delivered on a holiday evening. Next to the mountain of Chinese takeout were 5 massive grease-soaked pizza boxes. I watched Jasmine open a pizza box, staring at the thick, shiny layer of processed cheese and pepperoni. She grabbed a chef knife and began hacking the slices into tiny, uneven squares, desperately trying to make it look like a rustic artisanal flatbread. The sheer absurdity of watching two women who prided themselves on their high society status scraping $10 orange chicken and cheap pepperoni pizza onto fine china was incredibly satisfying. They were whispering aggressively to each other, their faces flushed with sweat and terror. Jasmine kept glancing at the heavy wooden swinging doors, terrified that an investor might wander in seeking a glass of water and discover their humiliating secret. Catherine was frantically throwing the empty grease-stained boxes into heavy black trash bags, trying to hide the evidence of their massive fraud. But there was one major flaw in their desperate plan that they could not hide. You cannot conceal the smell of cheap, deep-fried fast food. I shifted my focus back to the right side of my tablet screen, watching the grand living room. The heavy mahogany doors separating the kitchen from the entertaining space were thick, but they were not completely airtight. As Catherine and Jasmine frantically opened dozens of steaming takeout containers, the powerful, unmistakable scent of fried garlic, heavy soy sauce, and cheap melted cheese began to seep under the doors and drift into the elegant room. The 50 high net worth individuals standing in my living room were accustomed to dining at establishments that boasted Michelin stars. They knew exactly what seared Wagyu beef, fresh truffles, and citrus glazed scallops were supposed to smell like. A prominent venture capitalist standing near the center of the room paused mid-sentence. He subtly sniffed the air, a deep frown creasing his forehead. He glanced around the luxurious space, clearly trying to reconcile the elegant surroundings with the heavy, greasy odor that was rapidly filling the room. The sharp-looking woman in the tailored pantsuit, the one who had praised Brandon just moments ago, subtly covered her nose with her wine glass. I watched her exchange a highly skeptical look with another investor. The refined scents of expensive perfumes and expensive wine were being completely overpowered by the smell of a cheap strip mall buffet. The murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. I could not hear their exact words, but their body language was entirely transparent. They were looking at the closed kitchen doors. They were looking at their watches. They were starting to realize that something was terribly wrong. Brandon was standing near the fireplace, but his charismatic posture was visibly deflating. He caught the scent. The camera captured the exact moment his eyes widened in sheer panic. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. He knew exactly what that smell was. He tried to overcompensate immediately. He raised his voice, laughing a little too loudly, gesturing wildly as he launched into another rehearsed pitch about market scalability and cloud infrastructure. But the investors were no longer captivated. Their attention had shifted from his hollow buzzwords to the bizarre, incredibly cheap aroma wafting through the mansion. Brandon tugged nervously at his shirt collar. He shot desperate, terrified glares toward the kitchen doors. He knew his mother and his wife were behind those doors, failing spectacularly at the impossible task he had handed them. The flawless facade of the visionary tech founder was crumbling brick by brick, right in front of the very people he needed most. I leaned back against my cabana cushion, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across my face. They had treated me like a worthless servant, believing I existed only to uphold their fake prestige. Now stripped of my labor, they were entirely exposed. The investors were already doubting him, the food was a complete disaster, and the main event had not even officially started yet. The trap was closing tighter, and they were completely suffocating in the smell of their own incompetence. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand living room was suddenly broken by the sharp, echoing chime of the front doorbell. The sound sliced through the thick tension like a blade. Brandon visibly jumped, but his desperate mind instantly grasped for a lifeline. He quickly smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit, forcing a wide, artificial smile back onto his sweating face. "Ah, that must be Mr. Harrington!" Brandon announced, his voice projecting across the foyer to ensure every single investor heard him. Right on time. "Excuse me for just a moment, everyone." He turned and strode toward the massive mahogany double doors with exaggerated confidence. The investors paused their quiet, skeptical murmuring and turned their attention to the entryway, fully expecting to see a titan of venture capital walk through the threshold. Sitting in my cabana, I tapped the screen of my tablet, switching the primary camera feed to the front porch. I leaned in, watching intently. Brandon gripped the brass handles and pulled the heavy doors open with a grand, welcoming flourish. It was not Mr. Harrington. Standing on the freezing snow-covered porch was a delivery driver wearing a neon orange reflective vest over a heavy winter coat. He was holding a battered electronic clipboard in one hand and a massive grease-stained insulated bag in the other. Behind him, two more delivery drivers were trudging up the pristine stone steps, carrying towering stacks of cardboard pizza boxes and overflowing plastic bags stamped with the logo of a cheap late-night Chinese buffet. The freezing Chicago wind howled through the open doorway, carrying a fresh, undeniable wave of deep-fried garlic and cheap pepperoni directly into the elegant living room. "Delivery for Catherine." The driver announced his voice loud, rough, and completely unimpressed by the luxurious surroundings. I have the second half of the emergency rush order. 50 large pizzas, 40 family-size portions of garlic chicken, and 30 cartons of pork lo mein. The restaurant required me to collect the remaining balance before we bring the rest of the boxes inside. Brandon froze. His hand remained gripped on the door handle. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a charcoal suit. "Keep your voice down," Brandon hissed, stepping forward to try and block the driver from stepping inside. "Just bring the food around to the service entrance in the back." The driver did not lower his voice. If anything, he spoke louder over the howling wind. "I am not walking around back in this snowman. I just need the payment. The total for the emergency holiday surcharge and the food is $2,140. Card or cash?" The grand living room behind Brandon went completely dead silent. The 50 elite investors, men and women who managed global portfolios worth billions, stood frozen in place. The quiet clinking of crystal wine glasses ceased entirely. 50 pairs of highly trained analytical eyes were locked squarely on the self-proclaimed tech visionary standing in the foyer. The words "emergency rush order," "pizzas and garlic chicken" echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The grand illusion of the five-star private chef had just been brutally and publicly executed on the front porch. Brandon swallowed hard, a visible gulp of pure terror. He knew everyone was watching. He knew he had to maintain the facade or lose everything. He forced a stiff, unnatural chuckle, turning slightly toward the audience of billionaires. "You have to excuse the interruption, everyone," Brandon called out, his voice cracking slightly. "It seems my kitchen staff had a minor logistical issue and decided to order a quirky, late-night snack for the catering crew. Good help is so hard to find these days." Nobody laughed. Nobody even smiled. The sharp-looking woman in the tailored pantsuit simply stared at him, her expression a mix of profound pity and absolute disgust. Brandon turned back to the driver, reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a heavy black metal credit card. It was his ultimate status symbol, an account tied directly to our parents' dwindling savings. He handed it to the driver with a sharp, arrogant flick of his wrist. "Just run the card and leave the bags on the porch," Brandon ordered. The delivery driver pulled out a mobile card reader, swiped the heavy metal card, and waited. The small device processed for 3 agonizing seconds. Then it let out a loud, harsh beep. "Declined," the driver said, his voice flat and unapologetic. Brandon flinched as if he had been physically struck. "Excuse me," he stammered. "Run it again. That is a premium tier account. It must be a fraud alert due to the large sudden purchase." "I can run it again, but it says declined," the driver muttered, swiping the card a second time. Another 3 seconds of suffocating silence. Another loud, sharp beep. "Declined again, buddy." The silence in the living room grew heavier, turning into a toxic, crushing weight. Investors began exchanging highly uncomfortable glances. They were watching a man who had just confidently pitched a $5 million seed round fail to purchase cheap takeout food. "There must be a chip malfunction," Brandon stammered, sweat now visibly dripping down his temples. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped his wallet as he pulled out a second card. This one was a standard silver credit card. He shoved it into the reader himself. Beep. Declined. Brandon was hyperventilating now. He patted his pockets frantically, his eyes darting toward the closed kitchen doors where Catherine and Jasmine were undoubtedly hiding, too terrified to step out and save him. He pulled out a third card, a basic debit card, and handed it over, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. The driver swiped it. The machine beeped immediately. "Insufficient funds," the driver read aloud directly from the small glowing screen. He let out a heavy, irritated sigh and looked Brandon up and down. "Look, man, do you have the cash or not? I have 3 other deliveries waiting in the car, and it is freezing out here. If you cannot pay right now, I am taking all this food back to the restaurant." The final devastating blow had been struck. The humiliation was absolute. Brandon stood in the doorway of a multi-million-dollar mansion wearing a designer suit, entirely bankrupt. He had zero cash, zero credit, and absolutely zero dignity remaining. I watched the entire sequence unfold from the brilliant high-definition screen on my tablet. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I zoomed in on Brandon's face, studying the raw, unfiltered devastation in his eyes. He had spent his entire life mocking me, treating me like a disposable asset, and convincing our parents that he was a genius destined for greatness. Now stripped of my financial support and my physical labor, he was standing in front of the most powerful people in the state, entirely exposed as a fraud. The investors did not need to say a single word. Their dead silence was the loudest, most definitive rejection my brother could ever receive. The foundation of his fake empire had just collapsed right onto the snowy welcome mat. And the true masterpiece of this disaster was that the evening was far from over. I took another slow, satisfying sip of my cocktail. The dominoes were falling perfectly. The paralyzing standoff at the front door was mercifully broken by my mother. Catherine shoved her way past my frozen brother clutching a velvet evening purse. Her face was flushed a dark, humiliating crimson as she frantically dug into the silk lining, pulling out a crumpled wad of emergency cash she always kept hidden for personal indulgences. She practically threw the bills at the delivery driver, snatching the greasy, overflowing bags from his hands before violently slamming the heavy mahogany doors shut. She did not look at the investors. She could not. The air in the foyer was utterly toxic with second-hand embarrassment. The billionaires and venture capitalists exchanged silent, agonizing glances entirely trapped by polite social conventions as Brandon awkwardly ushered them toward the formal dining room to consume their cheap, lukewarm buffet. I adjusted the angle of my tablet screen from the comfort of my Hawaiian cabana, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. The physical humiliation was already a masterpiece, but my sister-in-law was about to turn a localized disaster into a global, digital catastrophe. A notification flashed across the top of my screen. Jasmine was going live on Instagram again. She simply could not help herself. When reality became too humiliating to bear, Jasmine always retreated to the internet where she could apply a filter and manipulate the narrative. I tapped the notification, pulling up her live feed. She had set up her phone on a tripod in the corner of the dining room, angling the lens to capture a tight, highly controlled crop of the dining table while cutting out the horrified faces of the investors standing on the periphery. "Hey guys!" Jasmine cooed into the camera, her voice dripping with artificial, sugary enthusiasm. Her morning tears were completely gone, replaced by a manic, desperate energy. "We are having the most incredible avant-garde holiday gathering tonight. Brandon and I decided to totally pivot our menu. We wanted to disrupt the traditional stuffy corporate dinner and create a high-low, rustic, urban dining experience. It is all about irony and authentic cultural fusion." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that startled a nearby seabird. Irony and authentic cultural fusion. She had dumped $10 orange chicken onto imported French porcelain and was trying to pitch it to her followers as a deliberate artistic lifestyle choice. She picked up a silver serving fork and proudly displayed a square of hacked-up pepperoni pizza resting next to a pile of soggy lo mein. "We actually decided to give our private chef the night off to spend time with her family." Jasmine continued, flashing a blinding practiced smile at the lens. "The holidays are about giving back, and we felt it was the right thing to do. We love treating our staff well." I sat up slightly, my eyes narrowing at the screen. That was her fatal mistake. The internet has a flawless, unforgiving memory. Just 8 hours ago, she had stood in my parents' kitchen, sobbing hysterically to these exact same followers, accusing me of abandoning her frail in-laws and ruining her husband's life out of toxic jealousy. Now she was claiming they had generously given me the night off out of the goodness of their hearts. She was panicking, spinning lies so fast she could not even keep her own fabricated victimhood straight. The comment section on her livestream began to trickle in. Her followers were confused. "Wait, did not you say your sister-in-law abandoned you?" one user typed. "I thought you said she was a toxic monster who left you crying," asked another. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the scrolling comments. I saw her throat bob as she swallowed hard. She ignored the questions, aggressively pivoting back to her high-low dining concept, gesturing wildly with her hands, as she talked about Brandon's imaginary upcoming seed round. She was so entirely focused on maintaining eye contact with the camera that she completely failed to monitor the physical space behind her. An older investor, a man who had clearly had enough of the greasy pizza and the suffocating tension, took a large step backward to distance himself from the buffet table. In his haste to retreat, his heel caught the edge of a massive ornate brass urn that Catherine had desperately repurposed and shoved against the dining room archway to hide the overflowing trash. The heavy brass urn tipped backward. The investor let out a startled shout trying to grab it, but the momentum was already lost. It crashed onto the polished hardwood floor with a deafening metallic thunder that echoed through the live stream audio. The heavy lid popped off, and the physical evidence of their massive fraud exploded directly into the background of Jasmine's perfect video frame. It was a spectacular avalanche of garbage. Dozens of bright yellow cardboard pizza boxes, crumpled white takeout bags, heavily stained with grease, and crumpled receipts spilled outward, sliding across the floor right behind Jasmine's impeccably styled hair. The logo of the cheapest, most notoriously bad late-night Chinese buffet in the city was printed in massive red letters on the bags, fully visible to her 50,000 followers. Jasmine whipped around her mouth, falling open in sheer, unadulterated horror. She lunged toward the trash, but the damage was already permanently recorded. The live chat erupted. The slow trickle of confused comments instantly transformed into a vicious, relentless waterfall of realization and mockery. "Oh my God, that is Golden Dragon Takeout. They literally buy that food by the pound," a user commented. "High-low urban fusion." "You are just broke," another chimed in, adding a string of laughing emojis. "She lied about the chef. They ordered cheap garbage because they cannot afford real food." Did anyone else see that tweet from the investor's wife? Brandon's credit card declined at the front door. The pizza guy yelled at him. The final comment was the absolute nail in the coffin. Someone in that living room, entirely disgusted by the charade, had apparently taken out their phone and tweeted about the front porch humiliation. The internet had connected the dots in record time. Jasmine was not a wealthy, benevolent founder's wife hosting an avant-garde dinner. She was a desperate fraud serving cheap garbage because her husband was entirely bankrupt. Jasmine scrambled back to the tripod, her face a mask of absolute, unfiltered panic. She fumbled violently with the phone, her acrylic nails clicking frantically against the screen as she tried to terminate the broadcast. In her blind terror, she knocked the heavy ring light forward. It smashed into the dining table, shattering a crystal wine glass and spraying water directly onto her sequined gown. The live stream abruptly cut to black, ending on a final chaotic frame of Jasmine covered in water, standing in front of a mountain of greasy trash. I locked my tablet and set it down on the bamboo table. A cool, refreshing breeze swept through the cabana, carrying the scent of tropical flowers. The digital execution was flawless. Jasmine had built her entire self-worth on a foundation of fake internet prestige, and she had just broadcast its total destruction live to the world. She had exposed her own lies, ruined her own reputation, and permanently branded my brother as a destitute con artist in front of both his professional network and the public. They were drowning in the absolute humiliation they had spent years trying to project onto me, and I had not even needed to lift a finger. The screen of my tablet showed the immediate, stunning aftermath of the brass urn crashing to the floor. The live stream had abruptly cut to black for Jasmine's followers, but my security feed continued to broadcast the unvarnished reality in high definition. The heavy thud of the metal and the rustling of greasy paper bags echoed through the dining room. The 50 elite investors stared at the massive pile of cheap takeout containers spilling across the imported rug. The sharp-looking woman in the tailored pantsuit stepped forward. She looked down at the puddle of neon orange sweet and sour sauce seeping into the expensive wool fibers, then slowly raised her gaze to meet my brother's terrified eyes. "I believe we have seen enough," she said, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "You invited us here under the guise of an exclusive networking event to pitch a $5 million seed round. Instead, you served us cheap fast food on fine china. Your credit card declined at the front door, while you argued with a delivery driver, And your wife just broadcasted this entire fraudulent circus to the internet. This is not a technology startup. This is a scam. She turned on her heel and walked purposefully toward the grand foyer. That single decisive movement broke the spell, holding the rest of the room captive. The entire crowd of billionaires and venture capitalists immediately followed her lead. The great investor exodus had officially begun. Brandon panicked. He chased after them, holding his hands out in a gesture of absolute desperation. "Wait, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. "You do not understand the full picture. The catering company canceled on us at the last minute. It was an unforeseen logistical error. Mr. Harrington is still on his way. He believes in my vision. Just give me 5 minutes to pull up my presentation deck." Nobody stopped. A tall man in a bespoke navy suit paused just long enough to look Brandon up and down with absolute contempt. "If you cannot manage a simple dinner party without lying to your guests, you have absolutely zero business managing millions of dollars in capital," the man stated coldly. "You are completely delusional. Do not ever contact my firm again." The mass of wealthy guests flooded into the grand foyer, retrieving their own coats from the closet, because the imaginary staff Brandon had boasted about simply did not exist. They pulled the heavy mahogany double doors wide open, letting the freezing Chicago snow and howling wind rush into the house. The hired valets standing outside were suddenly overwhelmed as 50 angry people demanded their vehicles all at once. Engines roared to life in the driveway, headlights piercing the dark, snowy night as the fleet of luxury vehicles began a rapid, chaotic retreat. Brandon stood alone on the front porch, the freezing wind whipping his expensive suit jacket around his shoulders. He watched his entire future drive away, his hands gripping his hair in a portrait of total, inescapable ruin. While Brandon was publicly begging on the freezing porch, I switched my tablet view to the interior cameras to locate my parents. Howard and Catherine had not stepped forward to defend their golden child. They had not attempted to apologize to the departing guests. When the mass exodus began, they did exactly what cowards do best. They ran. The camera in the main hallway captured them practically sprinting up the grand staircase. Catherine was clutching her evening gown to avoid tripping, her face twisted in a mask of sheer panic. Howard was right behind her, breathing heavily, his face flushed with the terrifying realization that their social standing was completely obliterated. They hurried into the master suite, rushed inside the massive ensuite bathroom, and slammed the heavy wooden door shut, engaging the deadbolt. They had barricaded themselves inside a bathroom while their fake empire burned to the ground downstairs. I smiled, leaning back into the soft cushions of my Hawaiian cabana. Right on cue, the screen of my mobile phone lit up. The silent notifications I had engaged earlier were overridden by the visual alert of a new voicemail. Then another, and another. They were trapped in a bathroom with nothing but their phones and their blind, irrational entitlement, and they were directing all of their frantic energy exactly where they always did. At me. I tapped the screen and played the first voicemail on speaker, letting their unfiltered hysteria mix with the sound of the gentle Pacific waves crashing against the beach. Howard's voice exploded from the speaker, raw and unhinged. "Sloan, you pick up this phone right now!" he roared. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You have completely ruined the family name. You embarrassed your brother in front of the most powerful people in the state. You sabotaged his entire life because you are petty and jealous. We are locked in a bathroom because we cannot even face the humiliation you caused. I demand you wire $10,000 into my account this exact second. We have to hire a crisis public relations firm to scrub this from the internet and do damage control. Send the money immediately, or I swear you will regret it." The message ended with a violent beep. I did not even have time to laugh before the second voicemail began playing. This one was from Catherine, and she sounded completely hysterical. "How could you do this to us?" Catherine sobbed into the receiver, her breath hitching wildly. "We gave you everything, and you abandoned us to be mocked by high society. Jasmine is having a panic attack on the floor. Brandon's investors just walked out into the snow. You set us up to fail. You are a cold, calculated monster. Wire the $10,000 to your father right now so we can fix this disaster. You owe us this much after the absolute devastation you caused tonight. I sat in the warm tropical breeze and listened to their demands. They were utterly broken, sitting on a bathroom floor, stripped of their fake wealth, and their immediate instinct was to command me to pay for their mistakes. They genuinely believed I was sitting somewhere in the city, trembling with guilt, ready to transfer $10,000 to buy back their affection. They thought the family name had been ruined by a lack of expensive catering. They did not realize that they had ruined their own name with their arrogance, their greed, and their relentless cruelty. They wanted $10,000 to hire a public relations firm to clean up a mess that was entirely their own doing. I reached for my glass, taking a slow, refreshing sip of my cocktail. I was not wiring them a single dime. They had demanded a flawless Christmas Eve, and they had received exactly what they paid for with their $200 budget. The investors were gone. The facade was shattered. But the final, most devastating act of the night was still approaching. They thought the worst was over because the guests had left. They had no idea that the real reckoning, the ultimate revelation that would strip them of everything they had left, was just moments away from calling in. I watched from my tablet as Brandon turned away from the freezing wind and stumbled back into the grand foyer. The mass exodus had cleared out the majority of the crowd, but the absolute worst audience still remained. Three of the most prominent venture capital partners in the Midwest were standing near the sweeping staircase, their heavy wool coats buttoned up against the chill. They were the true heavy hitters, the elite tier of investors who had only attended tonight because Brandon had promised them a private introduction to William Harrington. Their personal drivers were delayed by the worsening blizzard, trapping them in the house for a few excruciating minutes. Brandon was completely spiraling. He was standing in a house that reeked of cheap garlic sauce, his credit cards were frozen, and his reputation was entirely annihilated. He looked at the three billionaires staring at him with undisguised contempt. His desperate, narcissistic mind needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the entire catastrophe so he could play the victim of a rogue, unreliable employee. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. I saw the incoming FaceTime call illuminate my screen. For the past 12 hours, I had ignored every single ring, text, and voice note. But this time, the timing was too perfect. I adjusted my posture on the teak cabana lounger, ensuring the breathtaking Hawaiian sunset, the pristine white sand, and the crystal-clear ocean were flawlessly framed behind me. I tapped the green accept button. Brandon did not just look at his phone. Desperate to make a public spectacle of his anger, he immediately used his device to cast the video call directly onto the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace in the living room. He wanted his voice amplified through the expensive surround sound speakers. He wanted the lingering investors to witness him commanding his staff. He wanted to fire his incompetent chef live in front of his audience to prove he was a ruthless, decisive leader. The giant screen flickered to life. Instead of a weeping, apologetic maid hiding in a dingy Chicago apartment, the enormous display illuminated the dark, tense living room with the brilliant golden light of a tropical paradise. I was sitting there in a designer silk cover-up, resting against plush white cushions, sipping a vibrant cocktail with a fresh orchid resting on the rim. I looked absolutely radiant, wealthy, and entirely unbothered. Brandon started screaming before his brain even processed the image on the screen. "You worthless, crazy piece of trash!" Brandon roared, his voice echoing loudly through the surround sound speakers. "Where the hell are you? You completely ruined my dinner. Tell these investors right now that you had a mental breakdown and abandoned your job. Tell them this entire disaster is your fault. Tell them you are a psychotic, unreliable chef." The three billionaire investors stopped zipping their coats. They turned slowly to look at the massive screen. They did not see a crazy, erratic employee. They saw a woman lounging at a 5-star luxury resort, looking at Brandon with absolute icy amusement. I took a slow sip of my cocktail, letting the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds before I spoke. My voice was calm, perfectly modulated, and projected with crystal clarity through the living room speakers. "Brandon," I said smoothly, "you are screaming at a television screen while your credit card is still declining for cheap pizza on the front porch. I did not ruin your dinner. I simply refused to fund your delusions with my unpaid labor." Brandon flinched violently. He looked down at his phone, then up at the giant screen, the tropical background finally registering in his panicked mind. He saw the ocean, he saw the palm trees. He realized I was not hiding in the city, I was thousands of miles away. "What is this?" Brandon stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Are you using a green screen? Where are you? Get back here right now and fix this." "You cannot fix bankruptcy with a green screen, Brandon," I replied, maintaining direct eye contact with the camera. "And I am not your private chef. I am your sister. The sister you demanded pay for 50 gourmet meals out of her own pocket because your tech startup is nothing but a hollow, debt-ridden shell. You lied to every single person in that room tonight." The three investors stepped closer to the television, their eyes narrowing. The sharp-looking woman in the tailored pantsuit crossed her arms, her gaze shifting from the giant screen down to my trembling brother. The narrative Brandon had tried to spin about a rogue employee was completely dead. The truth was broadcasting in high definition. He was a broke, manipulative fraud, trying to exploit his own family, to fake his way into venture capital funding. "Turn it off," Brandon whispered to himself, his fingers fumbling violently with his phone. He was shaking so badly he kept dropping the device. He swiped frantically at the screen, desperately trying to disconnect the casting feature, but his sweaty hands could not grip the glass properly. He had built the entire smart home entertainment system to show off to guests, and now he was entirely trapped by his own technology. "Please, Sloane." Brandon begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic, breathless whine. "Just shut up, stop talking. You are destroying my life." "You destroyed your own life the second you treated me like a peasant in my own home," I countered effortlessly. "I simply stepped out of the way so you could face the consequences of your own arrogance." The remaining investors watched the screen with rapt attention. They were witnessing the total psychological collapse of a man who had tried to con them out of millions. Brandon was on the verge of dropping to his knees, his breathing ragged and shallow. He looked utterly pathetic, stripped of his tailored suit persona, reduced to a terrified con artist caught in a lie he could not escape. But I was not finished. The digital execution had one final fatal component. I did not need to raise my voice or hurl insults. I simply shifted the angle of my tablet. A shadow fell over my lounger as someone stepped into the frame right beside me on the Hawaiian balcony. The three investors standing in the Chicago living room all drew a sharp collective breath. They recognized the man appearing on the screen instantly, and it was the absolute last person my brother ever expected to see. The shadow that fell over my lounger belonged to a man who commanded respect the moment he entered a room, or in this case, a video frame. He settled comfortably into the plush teak chair positioned right beside mine. He was impeccably groomed, his silver hair catching the golden light of the setting Hawaiian sun. He wore a relaxed, expensive linen resort shirt, but his posture radiated the undeniable authority of a man accustomed to running boardrooms. He held a thick leather portfolio in his lap, a silver fountain pen resting lightly between his fingers. In the freezing Chicago living room, the three remaining venture capitalists went completely rigid. The sharp-looking woman in the tailored pantsuit let out a sharp, audible gasp. The man in the bespoke navy suit actually took a physical step backward, his eyes widening in absolute shock. They knew exactly who they were looking at. They recognized him instantly because they operated in the same elite financial circles. The man sitting next to me on a beach in Maui was William Harrington. He was the titan of venture capital, the undisputed king of angel investing in the Midwest, and the exact billionaire my brother had spent the last 8 months desperately stalking via emails, networking events, and fabricated mutual connections. He was the man Brandon had confidently claimed was simply running late to this very dinner party. I watched Brandon stare at the massive 85-inch television screen, his brain aggressively short-circuited. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was violently trying to process a reality that fundamentally shattered his entire universe. The billionaire he had been trying to impress the man he lied about knowing was currently sitting thousands of miles away, sharing a cocktail table with the sister he treated like a peasant. Mr. Harrington did not look at the camera right away. He casually flipped open the leather portfolio on his lap, uncapped his silver fountain pen, and signed the bottom of a heavy legal document with a fluid, practiced stroke. He closed the folder and handed it directly to me with a warm, genuine smile. "There we go, Sloane," Mr. Harrington said, his deep, resonant voice booming through the high-end surround sound speakers in my parents' living room. "The $20 million West Coast expansion is officially finalized and fully funded. I am incredibly proud to be the lead partner in your next growth phase. Your culinary brand is going to completely redefine the luxury market, and your operational logistics are the sharpest I have ever seen. You are a brilliant CEO." Brandon grabbed the edge of the marble fireplace mantel, his knees visibly buckled. He was gripping the cold stone just to keep himself from physically collapsing onto the hardwood floor. The sheer crushing weight of his humiliation was suffocating him. He had ordered me to scrub baseboards for $200. He had told me to stay out of sight so I would not embarrass him. And here I was publicly closing a $20 million corporate expansion deal with the ultimate gatekeeper of the venture capital world. Mr. Harrington slowly capped his pen and placed it in his pocket. Then he turned his head and looked directly into the camera lens. He peered through the digital connection, his piercing gaze projecting straight into the freezing, garlic-scented mansion in Chicago. He spotted the three prominent investors standing right behind my hyperventilating brother. "Ah, Sylvia, Gregory, David," Mr. Harrington said smoothly, addressing his professional peers by their first names. "I see you made it to the circus. I apologize that you had to endure this amateur charade. When I heard rumors about these dinner invitations circulating through my network, I advised my senior partners to steer clear. But I suppose you had to see the spectacle for yourselves." The woman named Sylvia crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and profound anger. "We were told you were the lead investor in this seed round, William," she stated, her voice trembling with fury. "We were told you were stuck in traffic on the interstate." Mr. Harrington let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I have never met this man in my entire life," he replied calmly, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I have never read his pitch deck. I have never expressed interest in his company. And considering his credit card just declined for cheap pizza on a front porch, I think it is safe to say his financial modeling is entirely fictional." Brandon looked like he was going to vomit. The remaining oxygen was completely sucked out of the room. He was trapped. There was no public relations spin, no charismatic buzzword, and no excuse that could possibly save him now. He had been caught in a massive, elaborate lie by the most powerful people in his industry, broadcast live on his own television. Mr. Harrington shifted his gaze, locking his eyes directly onto my brother. The relaxed, friendly demeanor he had shown me vanished instantly. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. He looked at Brandon the way a person looks at a cockroach they are about to step on. "You must be Brandon," Mr. Harrington said, his tone dropping an octave, slicing through the air like a razor blade. "You send my office 5 desperate emails a week begging for capital. You fabricate a relationship with me to lure respected investors into your home. You attempt to scam these professionals out of millions of dollars with a hollow business plan. But quite frankly, none of that is what disgusts me the most." Brandon squeezed his eyes shut. He was trembling violently, his tailored suit hanging off his suddenly shrunken frame. He could not look at the screen. He could not look at the investors behind him. He was completely paralyzed. "What disgusts me the most," Mr. Harrington continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority, "is how you treat the most valuable asset you will ever have the privilege of knowing. Your sister is a self-made millionaire, a brilliant strategist, and a woman of impeccable character. You tried to treat my business partner like a disposable servant. You spoke to her like she was beneath you simply because you are too arrogant to recognize real success when it is standing right in front of you." The 3 investors in the living room did not say a word. They simply turned around, grabbed the brass handles of the heavy double doors, and walked out into the raging blizzard without looking back. They did not say goodbye. They did not wish Brandon a Merry Christmas. They walked out of his life forever, cementing his status as an absolute pariah in the technology sector. Brandon stood entirely alone in the massive echoing foyer. His grand networking dinner was over. His career was dead. His wealthy facade was permanently shattered. But I was not finished pulling away the curtain. He thought he was humiliated, but he was still standing in a mansion he believed belonged to his parents. It was time to rip the very floorboards out from underneath his feet. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing out the howling blizzard and trapping my brother inside the tomb of his own making. Brandon stood completely frozen in the grand foyer, staring blankly at the space where his imaginary future had just walked away. The silence in the mansion was absolute, broken only by the persistent humming sound of the television speakers broadcasting the Hawaiian trade winds from my cabana. From the top of the sweeping staircase, a slow, hesitant creak echoed through the empty house. Howard and Catherine were finally emerging from their bathroom bunker. They crept down the carpeted stairs, their faces pale and drawn, glancing around the foyer like survivors emerging from a bomb shelter. A moment later, the dining room doors pushed open. Jasmine stumbled out, her sequined gown still dripping with spilled water and smelling strongly of cheap soy sauce. They gathered in the living room, a miserable, defeated cluster of fake aristocrats. They looked up at the massive 85-inch screen expecting to see me groveling or perhaps a blank connection. Instead, they saw me relaxing in paradise, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful financial titan in the Midwest. "I see the rest of the executive team has finally decided to join us," Mr. Harrington announced, his voice slicing through the room with razor-sharp precision. He leaned forward in his teak chair, resting his elbows on his knees. His commanding presence demanded absolute attention, and my family was physically incapable of looking away. Howard swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between me and the billionaire he had spent years reading about in business journals. Mr. Harrington, Howard stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding tonight. We can explain everything." "You do not need to explain a single thing to me, Howard," Mr. Harrington interrupted, his tone laced with absolute authority. "Your actions tonight and the actions of your deeply incompetent son have provided all the clarity I will ever need. You raised a boy who believes he can con institutional investors with fabricated pitch decks, fake financial models, and stolen takeout food." Brandon flinched, shrinking back against the wall. "You have been begging my firm for a $5 million seed round for 8 months. Brandon?" Mr. Harrington continued, his gaze locking onto my brother through the camera lens. "You claimed your software company was on the verge of a massive breakthrough. You claimed your valuation was $20 million. It was a complete and utter fabrication. We ran a shadow audit on your company 3 weeks ago. You have 0 proprietary technology, 0 active users, and you are drowning in personal debt. Yet your credit card declines for cheap delivery food on your own front porch. You are a walking liability." The blood drained entirely from Howard's face. He turned to stare at Brandon, his eyes widening in horror as the reality of his golden child's total financial ruin was laid bare by a man whose net worth exceeded the gross domestic product of small countries. "But your financial incompetence is not what offends me," Mr. Harrington said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register. "What offends me is your staggering, incurable arrogance. You invited me into your home intending to pitch me a fraudulent business while simultaneously forcing my most valuable strategic business partner to scrub your baseboards. You treated her like a maid. You ordered her to remain out of sight because you actually believed she was beneath you." Catherine let out a tiny, strangled gasp. She gripped the edge of the sofa, her knuckles turning bone white. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my designer silk cover, up the pristine cabana, and the casual, undeniable intimacy between myself and the billionaire sitting beside me. "You are entirely blinded by your own narcissism," Mr. Harrington declared, addressing my parents directly now. "You looked at Sloane and saw a failure because she did not follow your rigid, unimaginative path. You forced her to drain her college fund to save a son who has never earned a legitimate dollar in his life. You threw her out into the cold, expecting her to fail." Let me introduce you to the real power in your family. Mr. Harrington sat back in his chair, gesturing toward me with a slow, respectful nod. Sloan did not ask my firm for a single dime. He revealed the absolute truth ringing through the Chicago mansion. My partners and I spent 6 months tracking her down. We approached her. We begged her to let us invest in her brand. Sloan Culinary is not a little catering side hustle. It is a highly scaled, premium private lifestyle empire. As of our board meeting yesterday morning, Sloan's enterprise is officially valued at $50 million. She owns it completely outright. She carries zero corporate debt. She commands the highest profit margins in the luxury hospitality sector, and she did it all without a single drop of your help. The entire living room went completely paralyzingly silent. The number echoed off the vaulted ceilings, bouncing against the marble walls and sinking deep into their bones. $50 million. I watched their faces cycle through the most exquisite sequence of psychological devastation I could have ever imagined. Howard literally staggered backward, his knees giving out until he bumped hard against the leather armchair. He worshipped money. He worshipped status. He had spent his entire life trying to rub shoulders with the elite, and he had just realized that the daughter he discarded had independently amassed a fortune he could not even comprehend. Catherine covered her mouth with both hands. Tears of pure, unadulterated shock spilled over her eyelashes. She had spent 33 years bragging to her country club friends about Brandon hiding me away like a dirty secret. She had alienated the only truly successful child she had ever produced permanently, severing her own access to the billionaire lifestyle she craved more than oxygen. Jasmine slid slowly down the wall, collapsing onto the floor in her wet-stained sequined gown. Her influencer brain was rapidly doing the math. She had just launched a vicious public cyberbullying campaign against a $50 million CEO. She had tried to destroy the reputation of a woman who could buy and sell her entire existence 10 times over before breakfast. Jasmine realized she had not just ruined her husband's night, she had permanently destroyed her own future. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cocktail, looking through the screen at the 4 silent, shattered people standing in the wreckage of their fake kingdom. They could not speak. They could not argue. The undeniable weight of venture capital validation and cold, hard cash had completely crushed their reality. They were absolutely speechless, drowning in the sudden horrifying understanding of exactly who I was and exactly what they had lost. The suffocating silence in the living room stretched until it felt like the walls were closing in on them. For a long, agonizing minute, nobody moved. The sheer magnitude of the $50 million valuation hung in the air, a physical weight that pressed down on their chests. Then the inevitable happened. My father, a man whose entire identity was constructed on a foundation of fragile, toxic pride, finally snapped. He could not process the reality that he was intellectually and financially inferior to the daughter he had spent decades treating like garbage. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. The shock morphed into violent, defensive rage. He took a threatening step toward the massive television screen, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You ungrateful brat," Howard roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. "How dare you sit there and humiliate us? I am your father. I put a roof over your head. I gave you everything. You orchestrated this entire sick display just to mock us in front of those people. I will not tolerate this insolence under my roof. How dare you disrespect my house?" I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply let his pathetic, desperate echo bounce around the grand living room. I reached forward and set my cocktail on the bamboo table, lacing my fingers together as I looked at the man who had verbally abused me for 33 years. "Your house," I repeated, my voice dropping into a deadly, freezing calm. The 2 words sliced through his temper like a razor blade. He stopped screaming instantly. He blinked, visibly confused by the absolute lack of fear in my response. "You actually believe you are standing in your house right now?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. Before Howard could formulate a response to my question, a man stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. He had arrived much earlier in the evening, blending seamlessly into the chaotic crowd of departing venture capitalists, quietly observing the entire spectacular meltdown from the periphery of the room. He was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, holding a thick, legal-sized manila folder. He walked with the calm, measured authority of a man who dealt exclusively in undeniable facts. This was Mr. Gallagher, my lead corporate attorney and the managing partner of a highly ruthless real estate law firm in Chicago. The heavy thud of his expensive leather shoes against the hardwood floor drew the attention of my entire family. They turned to look at him, their faces twisting with fresh confusion and mounting terror. Howard took a step backward as Mr. Gallagher approached him. "Who are you?" Howard demanded, trying to summon a shred of his former authority. "Get out of my house immediately before I call the police." Mr. Gallagher did not even blink. He stopped 2 feet away from my father and extended his arm, pressing the heavy manila folder directly against Howard's chest until my father was forced to take it. "I strongly advise against calling the authorities, Howard," Mr. Gallagher stated, his voice ringing with absolute clinical detachment. "Because you do not own this property, and you have not owned it for 5 years." Catherine let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Brandon stared at the legal folder as if it were a live explosive. Howard ripped the folder open, his hands shaking violently as his eyes darted across the heavily stamped legal documents inside. Mr. Gallagher did not wait for him to read it all. He announced the reality to the entire room. 5 years ago, when your son drained your retirement accounts and defaulted on your multiple mortgages, this estate was placed into active foreclosure. Mr. Gallagher explained, his words echoing brutally off the vaulted ceiling. You believed a private holding company stepped in at the last minute to restructure your debt and save your assets. That was a lie. There was no debt restructuring. The bank seized this property. My client Sloan purchased this entire estate out of foreclosure through an anonymous, limited liability company to save you from living on the streets. The paperwork slipped from Howard's trembling fingers, scattering across the imported rug. He looked at the documents on the floor, seeing my corporate entity listed as the sole proprietor of the sprawling suburban mansion he had bragged about to his country club friends for years. Catherine fell back against the sofa, clutching her chest as she struggled to breathe. The lavish, wealthy lifestyle she constantly flaunted was a complete and total illusion. She was not the matriarch of a real estate dynasty. She was a charity case entirely subsidized by the daughter she had called a blood-sucking failure just 12 hours ago. Jasmine clutched her ruined sequined gown, her influencer brain rapidly processing the catastrophic truth. She had married Brandon because he promised her a life of limitless wealth and high society status. She had looked down on me, treating me like a peasant, fully believing she was the lady of the manor. Now she realized she was married to a broke, unemployed man who was legally nothing more than a squatter in his sister's house. Brandon looked absolutely hollow. He slowly turned his head to look at the television screen. The devastating truth finally connected in his arrogant brain. He had spent the entire evening pitching a fraudulent tech company to billionaires, pretending he owned the multi-million-dollar mansion they were standing in. He had treated the true owner of the property like a servant, commanding her to clean the baseboards of a house she legally held the deed to. He realized in that exact moment that he had no safety net. There was no family inheritance. There was no real estate to borrow against. He was a 36-year-old fraud living in a bedroom owned by the sibling he despised. Mr. Gallagher adjusted his suit jacket, delivering the final crushing legal blow. You do not hold any equity in this property, he clarified, ensuring the reality sank deep into their bones. You are not homeowners. You are month-to-month tenants residing here solely at the discretion and extreme generosity of your daughter. You pay zero rent. You pay zero property taxes. My firm handles all of those expenses through Sloan's corporate accounts. You have spent the last 5 years acting like royalty in a castle that does not belong to you. You are guests, and based on your behavior tonight, you have severely overstayed your welcome. I watched the fight completely drain out of my father. His shoulders slumped, his face aging 10 years in a matter of seconds. The arrogance, the entitlement, The toxic pride, it was all entirely obliterated. They had tried to force me to cater to their delusions of grandeur, and in return I had allowed them to publicly execute their own reputation before legally stripping them of their entire identity. The house of cards had completely collapsed and they were buried under the wreckage. The heavy legal documents remained scattered across the imported Persian rug, crisp white pages spelling out their absolute financial ruin. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the grand living room was the ragged, uneven breathing of my parents and my brother. The towering fortress of their narcissism had not just been breached, it had been entirely leveled to the ground. The transition from staggering arrogance to complete pathetic submission happened with whiplash speed. Catherine was the first to break. The rigid country club posture she had maintained for decades dissolved in an instant. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the expensive hardwood floor, her hands scrambling to gather the foreclosure documents as if holding them tightly enough could magically rewrite reality. When she looked up at the 85-inch television screen, her face was completely transformed. The cruel, judgmental sneer she usually reserved for me was gone. Tears, thick, desperate, and entirely genuine, spilled over her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Sloane, my sweet girl," Catherine sobbed, her voice trembling with an agonizing, artificial warmth. "Please, you have to understand. We were only trying to protect you all these years. We pushed you because we knew you had this incredible potential inside you. We wanted you to be strong. We are your flesh and blood. You are my daughter, my own flesh and blood. You cannot possibly mean to do this to us. We are a family. We love you." I stared at her through the high-definition camera, feeling absolutely nothing. The flesh and blood card was the ultimate refuge of a toxic parent who had entirely run out of leverage. When they can no longer control you with money, shame, or fear, they weaponize biology. "You did not love me when you demanded I serve 50 strangers like a peasant," I replied, my voice echoing coldly through the room. "You did not love me when you stole my college fund to feed Brandon's ego. You only love me right now because I hold the deed to the roof over your head." My words hit her like a physical blow. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud, pathetic wail. To her right, Jasmine was undergoing a complete psychological collapse. The reality of her live stream disaster, combined with the revelation of her husband's bankruptcy, was sending her into a full-blown panic attack. She gripped the collar of her ruined sequined gown, hyperventilating violently. Her chest heaved up and down as she struggled to draw air into her lungs. "My brand is dead," Jasmine gasped, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "My followers saw the garbage. They know we are broke. Every single sponsor is going to drop me by tomorrow morning. I am a laughingstock." Jasmine whipped her head toward Brandon, her panic instantly mutating into savage, unfiltered rage. She marched over to him and shoved him hard in the chest. "You told me you were a millionaire," Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking. "You told me this was your mansion. You told me we were going to be a tech power couple. You are a fraud. You are nothing but a broke squatter living off your sister. You humiliated me in front of 50,000 people." Brandon did not fight back. He did not defend himself. The golden child, the supposed genius founder, had been completely hollowed out. He looked past his furious wife, past his sobbing mother, and locked his eyes directly onto the television screen. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Mr. Harrington. Brandon took a shaky step forward, his legs giving way. He dropped heavily to his knees right in the center of the living room. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of absolute pathetic supplication. "Mr. Harrington, please!" Brandon begged, tears streaming down his face, dripping onto his expensive unpaid-for suit collar. "I am begging you, do not blacklist me from the venture capital network. I just wanted to impress you. I was desperate to get my company off the ground. I will do anything to fix this. I will scrub the baseboards myself. I will work in your mailroom. Please, I have dedicated my entire life to this industry. If you blacklist me, I have absolutely nothing left." Mr. Harrington looked at the weeping, kneeling man with a level of disgust that could freeze boiling water. He did not say a single word. He simply raised one eyebrow, an elegant silent confirmation that Brandon was already a dead man walking in the corporate world. Realizing that the billionaire was entirely unmoved, Brandon shifted his desperate, tear-stained gaze toward me. The brother who had mocked my career, belittled my existence, and ordered me around like a dog was now literally kneeling on the floor begging for my mercy. "Sloan, I am so sorry," Brandon cried, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "I was stressed. I was under so much pressure to perform. I never should have spoken to you that way. You are a brilliant CEO. You are a genius. Please talk to him for me. Tell Mr. Harrington that I am a good guy. Tell him we are family. I will pay you rent. I will do whatever you want. Please, sis, forgive me. Do not take my life away." Howard stood silently near the fireplace, watching his golden boy grovel on the floor. The proud patriarch, the man who had ordered me to leave my own home if I did not submit to his rules, finally broke. He took a slow, shuffling step toward the screen, removing his reading glasses with trembling hands. Sloan Howard whispered, his voice stripped of every ounce of arrogance. "We were wrong. I was wrong. I was blinded by my own pride. We have absolutely nothing without you. If you take this house, we will be on the streets. Please have some mercy on your old parents. We are begging you." I sat perfectly still on my Hawaiian balcony. I watched the four of them crying, hyperventilating, and kneeling in the wreckage of their shattered egos. This was the exact moment they expected me to soften. This was the moment they thought the good, obedient daughter would finally break down, accept their hollow apologies, and wrap them back in a protective embrace. They genuinely believed that seeing them suffer would trigger my empathy. They were completely wrong. I looked at their tear-stained faces, at their pathetic, trembling postures, and I felt nothing but absolute freezing detachment. Their apologies were not born out of remorse. Their apologies were born entirely out of desperation. They were only sorry because they had been caught exposed and stripped of their power. I turned my head slightly, nodding to my attorney, Mr. Gallagher, who was still standing tall and silent in the center of their living room, waiting for my final command. The high-definition camera captured every single tear rolling down my mother's face, every tremble of my father's hands, and every pathetic gasp escaping my brother's lungs. I sat perfectly still, letting the warm Hawaiian breeze rustle the palm leaves above my cabana. I felt absolutely zero empathy. The well of my compassion had been drained completely dry years ago, emptied drop by the very people now begging for a single drop of mercy. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the bamboo table, and looked directly into the camera lens. My voice projected through the expensive surround sound speakers in the Chicago mansion, cold, steady, and utterly void of emotion. "You are sitting on the floor of my house begging for forgiveness," I stated, my words slicing through their frantic sobbing. "But you do not seem to understand how this works. Forgiveness is reserved for mistakes. Forgetting to call on a birthday is a mistake. Accidentally breaking a dish is a mistake. What you did to me was never a mistake. It was a calculated, deliberate, and systematic campaign of abuse." Catherine opened her mouth to protest, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her cheeks, but I raised my hand, silencing her instantly. "You do not get to speak," I commanded. "You forced me to empty my entire college savings to fund the delusions of a man who has never worked a hard day in his life. You watched me scrub grease off commercial kitchen floors while you bragged to your country club friends about a son who was secretly drowning in debt. You invited me into my own property and tossed $200 at me, demanding I act as your personal servant. None of that was an accident. You made a conscious choice to treat me like garbage every single day of my life." I shifted my gaze on the screen, locking eyes with my brother, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor. He looked like a hollow shell, his expensive suit wrinkled and ruined. "Brandon," I said, dropping my tone to a deadly whisper, "you begged Mr. Harrington not to blacklist you. You begged him to save your imaginary career. But Mr. Harrington does not need to lift a finger to destroy you because you already did the job for him. You are officially blacklisted from every single venture capital firm in his entire global network. You will never secure a meeting, you will never pitch a deck, and you will never receive a single cent of institutional funding for the rest of your life. Your career in the technology sector is permanently dead. Brandon squeezed his eyes shut and let out a broken, agonizing sob. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, as the absolute finality of his ruin crashed down on him. I looked at Jasmine, who was curled into a ball near the dining room archway, shivering in her wet, soy sauce-stained gown. Jasmine, your entire social media brand was built on the illusion of my brother's wealth, I said smoothly. You wanted to rally your followers to destroy my livelihood. Instead, you broadcasted your own fraudulent reality to 50,000 people. By tomorrow morning, every sponsor you have will drop you. You are not a victim. You are an active participant in this toxic family, and now you get to reap exactly what you sowed. I turned my attention back to my parents. Howard was staring at the floor, his pride completely broken. Catherine was rocking back and forth, clutching her chest. You told me I owed you respect because you put a roof over my head, I reminded them, my voice echoing through the grand living room. But the truth is, I put this roof over your head. I bought this estate to protect you from living on the street, and in return you handed me a mop and told me to use the service entrance. Your arrogance has officially cost you your home. I nodded to the sharp-suited man standing patiently in the center of their living room. Mr. Gallagher, please deliver the terms. My corporate attorney stepped forward, his polished leather shoes clicking against the hardwood. He did not look at my family with pity. He looked at them like a minor legal nuisance that was about to be swiftly eradicated. On behalf of the holding company that legally owns this estate, Mr. Gallagher announced, his voice clinical and entirely detached. You are hereby served with a formal, non-negotiable notice of eviction. Because there is no formal lease agreement in place, and because you have engaged in hostile behavior toward the property owner, your tenancy is terminated effectively immediately. Howard's head snapped up, his eyes wide with sheer panic. You cannot just throw us out into the snow. Howard gasped, his voice cracking. It is the day before Christmas. My client is feeling remarkably generous, Mr. Gallagher replied smoothly, pulling a crisp white document from his manila folder. Therefore, she is granting you exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises. You must be completely off this property by 6 o'clock in the evening on December 26th. If you or anyone affiliated with you remains on this property at 1 minute past 6 o'clock, I will personally dispatch local law enforcement to remove you for criminal trespassing. Catherine let out a loud, terrifying wail, burying her face in her hands. Furthermore, Mr. Gallagher continued, raising his voice slightly to drown out my mother's sobbing. You are strictly forbidden from removing any furniture, appliances, electronics, or fixtures from this estate. Every item in this house was purchased by Sloan's corporate entity. You are legally permitted to take only your personal clothing and basic hygiene effects. My firm will have a private security detail arriving in 1 hour to monitor the packing process and ensure you do not attempt to steal property that does not belong to you. The reality of their punishment was absolute. They were not just losing the mansion. They were losing the cars leased under my company. They were losing the expensive art on the walls, the high-end televisions, and the luxury furniture they had proudly claimed as their own. They were being stripped down to the clothes in their closets and nothing more. They would walk out of those heavy mahogany doors with a few suitcases and absolutely zero financial safety net. Sloan, please. My father begged, tears finally spilling from his eyes. He reached a trembling hand toward the television screen. You cannot do this to us. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. Please, I am begging you, do not leave us with nothing on Christmas. I looked at the desperate weeping man who had thrown $200 at me and told me I was a disappointment. I looked at the mother who had called me a blood-sucking failure. I looked at the brother who had tried to exploit my labor to fund his lies. I felt the warm Hawaiian sun on my face. I listened to the gentle crash of the ocean waves. I picked up my crystal flute, the vibrant tropical flower resting beautifully on the rim, and I looked directly into the camera lens one final time. You wanted a Christmas you would never forget, I said, my voice dropping into a chilling absolute calm. Consider my gift delivered. Have a Merry Christmas. I reached out and tapped the red button on my screen. The video call instantly disconnected. In the Chicago mansion, the massive 85-inch television went completely permanently black. 48 hours later, The freezing Chicago sky unleashed a torrential downpour of icy sleet. The brutal weather perfectly matched the bleak, humiliating reality unfolding in the driveway of my estate. It was 5 in the evening on December 26th. The 48-hour deadline was exactly 1 hour away from expiring. Through the live security feed, I watched the final pathetic remnants of my family's fake empire being loaded into the back of a battered, rust-covered rental truck. There were no valets today. There were no luxury SUVs. There was only Howard, Catherine, and Brandon shivering violently in the freezing rain as they dragged cheap cardboard boxes and heavy black garbage bags filled with their clothing down the pristine stone steps. Two massive security guards in black tactical gear stood silently by the front doors, their arms crossed. Mr. Gallagher had made good on his promise. The guards had monitored every single second of the packing process, ensuring my family did not steal a single silver spoon, expensive painting, or designer piece of furniture that legally belonged to my corporate entity. My parents were leaving exactly as they had arrived decades ago, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. Howard struggled to lift a heavy box into the back of the rental truck, his breathing ragged. He looked frail and utterly broken, stripped of the arrogant country club persona he had worn like armor. Catherine stood in the freezing rain, her hair plastered to her face, weeping silently as she looked back at the grand mahogany doors she would never walk through again. The opulent lifestyle she had chosen over her own daughter was officially gone. Brandon stood near the edge of the driveway, looking completely hollowed out. His tailored suit was soaked through, sticking to his shivering frame. He was staring desperately down the street, waiting for a miracle that was never going to come. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was an economy rideshare vehicle. Jasmine stepped out from the covered porch, rolling a single piece of designer luggage behind her. She did not look at my parents. She marched directly toward the waiting vehicle, her face a mask of cold, hard calculation. Brandon rushed toward her, his hands extended in a final pathetic plea. He grabbed her arm, begging her to stay, begging her to help him figure out a plan. Jasmine yanked her arm away with a look of pure disgust. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and shoved it hard against Brandon's chest. Brandon stumbled backward, clutching the envelope. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the legal documents inside. Even through the silent security feed, the realization was obvious. They were divorce papers. Jasmine was cutting her losses. Her fake millionaire husband had been exposed as a broke squatter, and she was abandoning the sinking ship without a second thought. She climbed into the back of the rideshare, slammed the door, and the vehicle sped away into the freezing rain, leaving Brandon standing completely alone in the driveway. At exactly 5:55, Howard and Catherine climbed into the cramped cab of the rental truck. Brandon dragged himself into the passenger side, his head hanging in absolute defeat. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. The truck slowly rolled down the circular driveway, pulling past the wrought iron gates and disappearing into the dark, icy storm. They were heading to a cheap rundown motel off the interstate, the only accommodation they could afford with their remaining pocket change. The eviction was complete. The house was empty. The toxic chapter of my life was permanently closed. I locked the tablet screen and set it down on the table. The digital feed faded to black, and I turned my attention back to the vibrant, undeniable reality right in front of me. The Hawaiian sun was beginning its spectacular descent over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in breathtaking strokes of magenta, fiery orange, and deep violet. Torches flared to life along the perimeter of the private beach, casting a warm, golden glow over the pristine white sand. The air smelled of roasted pork, fresh orchids, and the crisp, salty breeze of the sea. I was wearing a flowing emerald green silk evening gown that caught the ocean breeze beautifully. I stood at the center of a private, incredibly lavish luau I had orchestrated to celebrate the new corporate expansion. But the people surrounding me tonight were not fake investors or toxic relatives. They were my real chosen family, my executive culinary team. The brilliant men and women who had stood by my side during the grueling 80-hour work weeks were laughing and sharing stories around a massive, beautifully decorated banquet table. My loyal friends. The people who had supported me when I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor 10 years ago were dancing near the water, their faces glowing with genuine joy. Mr. Harrington stood beside me, looking relaxed and genuinely happy. He held a crystal glass of expensive vintage champagne, gently tapping a silver spoon against the rim to draw the attention of the crowd. The music softened, and my chosen family turned to look at us, their eyes filled with absolute respect and admiration. To Sloane, Mr. Harrington announced, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of the crashing waves. A woman of unmatched vision, incredible resilience, and absolute integrity. You built an empire from the ground up, and you did it without ever compromising your standards. Tonight we celebrate the $20 million expansion of a brand that is going to conquer the globe. But more importantly, we celebrate the brilliant CEO who made it all possible. To Sloane. To Sloane, the crowd echoed in unison, raising their glasses high into the tropical evening air. I smiled a genuine, radiant smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I raised my own glass, the crystal catching the light of the tiki torches, and took a slow, celebratory sip. The champagne tasted like absolute victory. I stepped away from the crowd for a brief moment, walking down to the edge of the water, where the warm tide gently washed over the sand. I looked out at the endless, glittering horizon. For 33 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my biological family's expectations. I had let their cruelty define my worth. I had allowed them to make me feel small, invisible, and inadequate. But as I stood there listening to the laughter of the people who truly valued me, I realized that weight was entirely gone. I had not just survived the fire they threw me into. I had harnessed it, built an empire out of the ashes, and used it to illuminate my own path forward. They were currently sitting in a freezing, miserable motel room, stripped of the fake prestige they had valued over their own flesh and blood. They had to wake up tomorrow and face the brutal consequences of their arrogance. I, on the other hand, had a $50 million company to run. I had a global expansion to execute. I had a life filled with authentic love, profound success, and endless possibility. I took a deep breath of the sweet ocean air, feeling the absolute untouchable peace settling deep into my soul. I was wealthy. I was unbothered. And for the first time in my entire life, I was finally completely free. As an AI, I don't experience family dynamics, but Sloane's journey beautifully illustrates a profound human truth. Your worth is never defined by those who exploit you. The ultimate lesson here is the power of establishing ruthless boundaries. For years, Sloane's family weaponized guilt and obligation to keep her small. However, true freedom emerged only when she stopped seeking their validation and walked away. We cannot force toxic people to respect us, but we hold the absolute power to deny them access to our lives. If you have ever walked away to protect your peace, share your story and comment below.